So we now know that Chrystia Freeland has announced her bid for liberal leadership and potential prime minister. We also know that Mark Carney is also added to this list. And the National Post put this article together. We already know a bit of the baggage of Mark Carney. We know kind of the fact that he is the governor of the Bank of England, the governor of the Bank of Canada. We know that he is deeply, deeply investedly inside not non-government organizations, WEF, globalist tyrants. We know that he is very much on board with the digitized currency and the digital IDs. But there's more. There's a lot more, ladies and gentlemen, of just who exactly this Mark Carney guy really is. So, National Post says the baggage Mark Carney is bringing to his prime minister bid. It's not turning out to be the cakewalk that he thought it was going to happen. So, as candidates line up to become Justin Trudeau's successor as leader of the Liberal Party of Canada, former central banker Mark Carney has arguably been in the running for the position longer than anyone else. In fact, talk of Carney as Liberal leader goes all the way back to 2012, just after the party's historic defeat in 2011's federal election. Why don't I become a circus clown? Was Carney's ritos to the suggestion at the time. With Carney expected to officially announce his candidacy this week, he's already wading through a tide of political baggage, much of which didn't exist in 2012. Below, a quick summary of how Carney is already on the defense as he begins his campaign to become Canada's next prime minister. So, one of them being that he apparently has some connections, certain in interesting connections, as you're about to see here. So, as candidates line up to become, okay, there we go. In a pair of photos captured in 2013, Carney had been seen chatting with Ghislaine Maxwell, taking at the Wilderness Festival, a UK music and arts festival that brands itself as a designation for wholesome Hedinson. How do you pronounce that? It shows a smiling Carney standing next to Maxwell, along with his wife Diana Fox. At the time, Maxwell was mostly known as a British socialite, seen often in the company of charismatic U.S. financier Jeffrey Epstein. Now she's serving a 20-year jail term for assisting Epstein in running an elaborate pedophile sex trafficking ring. A source close to Carney told the Toronto Sun that Maxwell went to the same school as Fox's sister, and that while they have bumped into each other in other public settings, they are not friends. But they just coincidentally go to the same music festivals. They're smiling at each other. They obviously know about each other, but they're not friends. Just like Bill Gates. Oh, well, I went to Epstein, but I didn't do any of the things that they're accusing me of. I just went there for dinner, and just I maybe know about things, but I didn't actually partake in those things. So here's some of the photos here. You can see there's Ghislaine Maxwell, there's Mark Carney, and there's the wife there, and you know for not being friends, they seem awfully chummy. They seem very awfully chummy for not being close enough to this organization, which is why we don't want to be too suspicious of Mark Carney's connection with Ghislaine Maxwell. Um, so Melissa says so. Mark Carney attended parties with Prince Andrew, and Mark Carney was spotted and pictured with Ghislaine Maxwell. Yeah, so not friends, but attended parties with Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein, and Prince Andrew. So I would bet he knew what was going on. I would bet he knew something was up in this regard. He had to know something. being friends with all three of them, but we're not friends. We're not friends. I just happen to be a, British socialite. I just happen to show up to these parties. Sounds like celebrities with the P. Diddy scandals. Like, I just happened to go to the freak offs. I didn't know exactly what I was getting myself into, but I just happened to show up to one. Um, so there are no rules forbidding Canadian party leaders from holding dual citizenship. So the other scandal is that not only is he connections with Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein and that cabal, but also he holds multiple citizenships. Multiple citizenships. Listen to this. There are no rules forbidding Canadian party leaders from holding dual citizenship. Technically, it would be even possible for a non-citizen to be prime minister. But dual citizenship has been a point of controversy for Canadian politicians before, most notably with former Conservative leader Andrew Scheer, who held citizenship in both the United States and Canada. Although Scheer publicly announced his intentions to renounce his U.S. citizenship, he abandoned the effort after losing the 2019 election. Knowing that I wouldn't be prime minister, I discontinued that process, Scheer told CTV at the time. Mark Carney, is a citizen of 3 countries. Born a Canadian, he attained an Irish citizenship in the 1980s and then a British citizenship in 2018 when he was the governor of the Bank of England. So talk about someone who's a very, very vastly globalized globalized leader, if you will. That this guy goes around and has multiple citizenships in multiple areas and wants to run for leadership of Canada. And the fact that he is the governor of the Bank of England, has connections with Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, even though they're not friends, according to that article, they're not friends. They go to the same parties, they attend the same events, they're chummy towards each other. You saw the pictures where they're smiling next to each other. They knew something's up. They knew something's up. But there's more to this. There's more to this. One of the biggest electoral liabilities for the Liberal Party right now is their climate policy. Although the Trudeau Liberals were always very open about their intention to pursue an aggressive policy of emissions reduction, the carbon tax very quickly came to the rank among their most unpopular policies. Yeah, I wonder why. Taxing more people with taxing people that don't have the money to begin with to resort to reducing the emissions that you're producing more of. And as we've seen study after study, the more carbon tax they put on to ordinary Canadians, the worse the climate actually is. There's more emissions being placed as they continue to put these carbon taxes on. Because Justin Trudeau is not giving up his private jet. He's not giving up his 7 motorcades to go to public events. He's going to fly to Davos. He's going to fly to all these different places. They're not giving up their luxurious yachts. They're not giving up their big houses. So all this emission reduction is complete crap because the people at the top are still continuously putting out more and more emissions than any ordinary Canadian can do in their lifetime. But yet the blame gets put onto you. The blame gets put onto you. So yes, it is an unpopular policy, and that results into high prices of groceries, high prices at the gasoline pumps, high prices in general, and it's become a huge domino effect on every single industry. With Trudeau announcing his intention to resign, party insiders are now openly speaking of ditching the carbon tax altogether. Go for. This would be a harder track for Carney, given that he's one of the founders of the Net Zero Banking Alliance, a consortium of major financiers pledged to net zero emissions by 2050. Carney was also the UN Special Envoy on Climate Action and Finance. Now, why would those two be placed together? Why would those two be placed together? Well, because Mark Carney, being that he wants to digitize the currency and put everything into a digital ID format, he is a proponent of this because he wants to tie financial assets and your financial decisions to the climate, to how much emissions, to how much carbon you're making. So if you're going out to buy a car, if it's not a certain brand, if it's not a certain thing, he might cut off the finances. He might cut off your bank account for that. Oh, you're going to go over here? Well, we're not so happy and keen with that. It looks like you're producing more carbon. Bank. We're going to go after your bank account. That's why those two are connected. And he has a company. He has his own company involved in this. So he is a politician on a global scale that's influencing himself. That while being in politics, he's influxing all this business towards himself and enriching himself, which is absolutely corruptive on a massive scale. This the Net Zero Banking Alliance is faring about as well as the Liberal Party these days. Just last week, Morgan Stanley, Citigroup, and Bank of America all defected from the group. It also means there's plenty of video going around of Carney saying that businesses do not sign with the centralized decarbonization efforts should be punished. So people that don't sign on to this kind of green new world order, if you will, are going to be punished, according to Mark Carney. Does that sound like a liberal guy to you? Or does that sound like a globalized oligarch? Much similar to Klaus Schwab and Soros and all those other nefarious freaks and Bill Gates, who want to order you to do things when they don't even represent the true intentions of what they're stating. Because Bill Gates doesn't really care about the climate. He buys his own carbon credits. Mark Carney, the same thing. The companies and those who invent and lend them, who are part of the solution, will be rewarded. Those are lagging behind and are still part of the problem will be punished, Carney said in an interview with the United Nations Climate Action Office. There was also something mentioned in a recent column in The Spectre. Carney's last big government job was a bit of a fiasco. There's no obvious black marks on Carney's tenure as governor of the Bank of Canada. The years 2007 to 2013 were a pretty stable time for Canadian central banking. Carney, who had also prestige of Canada weathering in the 2008 Great Recession, better than almost any other peer country. But it's a different story for his time as governor of the Bank of England. As British financial columnist Matthew Lynn put it, Carney presided over low growth and the decline of London as the world's leading financial center. The bank printed way too much money, stroking an asset bubble, and ultimately triggering the highest inflation rate in the G7, wrote Lynn. So it was all, sugar plums and fairies for him being the bank manager here in Canada. And then he went to the Bank of England and toppled everything and caused the highest inflation. Do you think that's going to be promising for him running as prime minister when Justin Trudeau has already made it feasibly impossible for a lot of Canadians? You think that's going to be a better solution to have Mark Carney in there? Carney was also one of the key figures of what the UK tabloids press has dubbed Project Fear, an organized effort warning of dire financial consequences if the UK follow through with its exit from the European Union. Carney's successor, Andrew Bailey, has now publicly acknowledged that many of those warnings were overblown. He had a Canadian government job at the exact same time his company has been lobbying Ottawa for billions. It was in September when Carney got his first official link to the Liberal government by being named a senior economic advisor to the Prime Minister. Unusually, though, it was a position with the Liberal Party of Canada rather than the one with the Prime Minister's office. As conservative critics point out at the time, this would have allowed Carney to take the job without going through the usual conflict of interest disclosures required of a required of a prime ministerial aide. So they fast-tracked him to be in that position without going through the loopholes, without getting him vetted and seeing his background and realizing what a mess he is. He just swooped right in. Swooped right in. Even though he has connections with Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein, even though he has connections with the WEF, even though he gets kickbacks for his own corporation, his own company, that's putting the pressure on banking institutions that have to go net zero or we're going to shut off bank accounts. Now he's able to fast track to getting this position without any sort of criticism, without any legal disclosures of becoming the prime minister's aide. So now you know where all this carbon tax and all the scams and schemes within the green slush fund kind of originates from. It comes from people like Mark Carney who slithered themselves into our Canadian politics. He also got the job at the exact same time that his company, Brookfield Asset Management, was lobbying Ottawa on a $50 billion pension fund. $50 billion pension fund that would have been directed toward Canadian assets. Brookfield was asking the federal government to pony up as much as $10 billion for the fund to fund his own pensions to his own company. That was going to cost Canadian taxpayers. And they didn't find that all suspicious. They're not grilling him. They're not doing subject to inquiry. They're not doing investigations to that. No, because sadly, a lot of people in Trudeau's cabinet, like Chrystia Freeland and Mélanie Joly and Dominic LeBlanc, are all tied to this scheme. They're all tied to this global entity. Remember, Klaus Schwab said he penetrated the Trudeau cabinet, meaning that these are globalists installed into our democracy, posing themselves as typical Canadians that look for us regular Joes and Janes, but really are in for the global elite. They are evil masterminds that span around the globe. They don't even have permanent residency. Mark Carney has 3 different citizenships. 3. And now he's extorting Canadians by lobbying Ottawa to take taxpayer dollars to fund his own company's pensions at the tune of $50 billion. So, someone put this together. I thought it was pretty clever. Of this compilation here, or kind of like a montage, whatever you like to call it, of all these different publications, tweets, and postings to show exactly how corrupted Mark Carney truly is. So, Andy Lee, special rebel rapporteur, says, fun fact, one of the largest heat pump manufacturers eligible for the federal rebates is Trane Technologies. In 2021, Trane teamed up with Brookfield's renewables division to deliver green HVAC solutions. The chair of Brookfield is, of course, Justin Trudeau's friend, Mark Carney. So that's why they pushed for the electric heat pumps. Not because it's good for the planet or anything like that, but because Mark Carney gets a kickback every time a purchase is made on the electric heat pumps. Here's Yahoo Finance. Mark Carney's company accused of massively underreporting emissions. Mr. Green Thumb, underreporting emissions. Well, we don't have to report them if we can just buy our own carbon credits. Then we can just pollute whatever the hell we want. But it's you guys, you guys at home with your gas-powered lawnmowers and your cars and your TV, everything. You're the ones that have to suffer. You're the ones that are going to have to cough up. And you going to the grocery store with an apple that costs, $5-6 now is because I have to impose those carbon taxes onto you so that I can get away with putting more pollutants into the air, even though I'm supposed to be the environmentalist. Now you understand why people are skeptical and massively hate the carbon tax. They have massively hated the carbon tax for the last 3 years. Josh Ryan, Carney's wife, Diana Fox, works with Gerald Butts and Evan Solomon at the Eurasia Group, who receives millions in contracts from the Liberal government. Mark Carney is the godfather to one of Chrystia Freeland's sons. They're all one big corrupt family, and we aren't part of it. That's one of Chrystia Freeland's sons, the godfather, is Mark Carney. Like, do you see how deep the level? You see how deep this group, this gang, this malicious gang of globalist oligarchs, all colliding together, collaborating together for these measures to impose most horrific policies onto you, and are allowed to get away with their crimes. Like, do you see how deep this goes? From the Belfast Telegraph, Bank of England faces probe after bullying and harassment rise under Mark Carney. So surprisingly, he's not only just a scumbag financially and politically and done a lot of corruption and got himself involved deeply inside this cult, he is also a bit of an asshole. Go figure. Go figure. And on top of everything else, of course he's going to be a bit of an asshole, because this is a guy who is clearly a narcissist, completely self-involved with himself, and has no true intention to represent the people of Canada. Just like we saw with Chrystia Freeland with the handwritten notes that she did. She was defiant to go after Canadians. She wanted to go after Canadians. She was the one that imposed the freezing of bank accounts. She was the one that spearheaded the notion to call ordinary Canadians a bunch of white supremacists and Nazis and they're right wingers and they're anti-vaxxers. How dare they stand up to authority and question the great policies of big pharmaceuticals? Now you're just seeing another reincarnation, but I'd say this one's even a bit worse. Because I don't think Chrystia Freeland has three different citizenships and also has deep connections with Jeffrey Epstein. But who knows? Who knows? Like I said, it's a giant club, and you and I ain't in it. So here's Mark Carney going on to The Daily Show with Jon Stewart. Because I guess apparently Jon Stewart's going to take a slight interest in Canada. I don't know why they're on there. I don't know why Mark Carney decides to go on U.S. media. But most hilariously, Mark Carney goes on to The Daily Show to give one of the most hilarious jokes I've ever heard a guy like him would say. And Jon Stewart just allows it to happen. Listen.
It's really difficult for a candidate to come in who is saddled with the policies that are
But let's say...
Oh, boy.
Let's say, just throwing out a
Look at you trying to preserve the relationship all of a sudden.
A wild hypothetical. Let's say the candidate wasn't part of the government. Let's say the candidate did have a lot of economic experience. Let's say the candidate did deal with crises.
Let's say democracy never really happened. Let's say that I just came in on the heels of the global alliance of the World Economic Forum that doesn't care about Canada or sovereignty or borders or come from the billionaire class. And I just decide, hey, I'm just gonna run the country of Canada. What would you do then? What would you do then? Imagine how great that would be. Just, you're not part of Canada. You're just happen to show up and just decide, hey, I'm just gonna rule the country. How sinister that sounds. And he's casually saying this to Jon Stewart, not pushing back on the Daily Show here, just openly stating, like, imagine if, just this henchman of the billionaire class just walks in, decides, hey, I'm just going to become prime minister. Imagine if I'm not part of the Canadian government. Imagine I'm just, some asshole from the highest order, and it's just going to come in and seize by storm. Yes, again.
It's really difficult for a candidate to come in who is saddled with the policies that are on.
But let's say,
oh boy,
let's say, just throwing out a
look
wild
at you trying to preserve the relationship all of a sudden.
A wild hypothetical. Let's say the candidate wasn't part of the government. Let's say the candidate did have a lot of economic experience. Let's say the candidate did deal with crises. Let's say the candidate had a plan to deal with the challenges in the here and now.
You sneaky, you're running as an outsider.
I am an outsider.
Wow, that's all. So
that has got to be the most hilarious thing I've heard in that conversation. And obviously, I can't show you the full thing because Daily Show, CBS, they're going to have copyright strikes all over it. That is the hilarious part of it, though. That's the most hilarious part, though. After how deeply invested he is with the Bank of England, with the WEF, with all these globalist partners, the fact that he enriches himself with his own company, enforcing these horrific climate agendas that go after Canadians. And again, it's not whether or not climate change exists or not. It's the fact that these measures are purposely done to epitomize poor working Canadians, people that are less on the economic scale, to enrich those higher up in the economic ladder that are advancing themselves through these measures, and it's not really contributing anything to remotely anything environmental. Because all these billionaires can buy carbon credits. Mark Carney still has, jets that he flies to. Justin Trudeau still goes on vacations. They still travel to Davos. All these billionaires, they have motorcades. Justin Trudeau, when he last went to a public event, had seven motorcades surrounding him to a public event. And these are people we're supposed to listen and represent, basing this on climate. That these are the people intended with the best solutions to cut back emissions. And apparently their best solutions is, hey, we got to take your money. We got to take your personal data. We got to put everything to a digitized currency so that we can further monitor you for the best of climate, for the best of the earth, for the best of the environment. While I still continue to enrich my evil doings in my own companies and organizations. And he calls himself an outsider. He is an outsider. Folks, if he is an outsider, does that make Chris Christie a dietitian? Does that make me a gymnast? Does that make Helen Keller a comedian? Like, if he's an outsider, I mean, up is down, black is white, woman is man, man is woman. I don't know anything anymore. But to just blatantly state that right Jon Stewart's face, and Jon Stewart, of course, is not going to push back on that. Probably because he's afraid he might have to pin another Nazi again. That's the corporate media punishment these days. If you go outside the lines, you have to pin a award on some sort of Nazi figure. That's the new punishment these days. So, of course, Jon Stewart's going to let this by. And even the audience is okay. Oh, yeah. How great it'd be just a billionaire just to walk up and buy the government. And these are the same people that will, at the same time, talk about how Elon Musk is buying the Trump administration. Elon Musk is bad, but this guy is okay. because he talks about the earth, he talks about climate, he talks about how we're gonna make things better for people. Just has the right words. That's all we need is the person with the right lingo. Forget the policies, forget the connections of pedophile rings, forget the, the lobby interests, forget the corruption, forget enriching his own companies through the green policies. Forget all that. Or his connections to the WEF, how he became this success story in politics. Forget all that. He's just kind and considerate, and we just need to bring him into Canada. Forget that he's elected official or part of the Canadian government. Outsider. Oh my god. That's got to be the most hilarious thing. Let's hear this again in full.
It's really difficult for a candidate to come in who is saddled with the policies that are on.
But let's say,
Oh boy.
let's say, just throwing out a
Look at you trying to preserve the relationship all of a sudden.
a wild hypothetical. Let's
All right.
say the candidate wasn't part of the government. Let's say the candidate did have a lot of economic experience. Let's say the candidate did deal with crises. Let's say the candidate had a plan to deal with the challenges in the here and now.
You sneaky, you're running as an outsider.
I am an outsider.
Wow, that's all. So you're going to be coming in there to say, I have not been in the government. I have worked in the financial markets. I understand all the things that go around trade.
Yeah, that really makes you sound like an outsider. You worked inside the financial trades, you work in the stock market, you know about finances, you work for the Bank of England, the Bank of Canada. Yeah, that definitely sounds like someone, completely outside of politics. Definitely sounds like someone who's vastly different and completely outside the norms. Or it could just sound like a globalized stooge, once again, appearing to sound like a normal guy when really he's the epitome of all the nefarious evil doings that is going to be imposed on Canada, furthering down this rabbit hole of the WEF engulfing the Canadian government. Klaus Schwab, we want to penetrate Trudeau's cabinet. And because of members like him, that claim himself to be an outsider, or Chrystia Freeland saying, I'm going to be a fighter. And realizing that the people that are going to be detrimented by this is Canadians. Because he's not an outsider. Chrystia Freeland's not a fighter. They're just sinister, psychotic sociopaths that are only in the positions of power that they are because they serve the overlord globalist leaders that have really drenched this country, that have eroded this country to the fact that democracy is pretty much a joke. And that's why Mark Carney's like, oh, well, imagine if I just walked in there. Like, forget about actually having someone in Canada that may have good policy and then they get elected in and the people respect them. Forget about campaigning and all this stuff. Forget about looking at historical facts and track records of people. What if I just come in, just become prime minister? What if I just do that? As an outsider?